Welcome to the TJ Malden Leadership Podcast, where we talk about life, leadership, and the gospel.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with me today on the podcast. Today, I want to talk about something that I have experienced a lot of times, and I think a lot of people have experienced this many times. Matter of fact, if you're a Major League Baseball player, you can be really, really good, like a really good baseball player. And 7 out of 10 times, this is going to happen to you. Today, I want to talk about failure, all right? Missing the mark, making a mistake, messing up. It's one of the craziest statistics in the world to think about. But if, like a Major League Baseball player, if they bat 300, they're considered a good, like really good Major League Baseball player, and they can make millions of dollars batting 300. That means that 7 out of every 10 times they go up to the plate, they're going to strike out. They're going to fail. And so today, over the last few weeks even, I've been thinking about failure. I've been thinking about fails, and it even went viral for a while where, people would hashtag fail or, oh, that was a major fail. And so we all experience it. We all go through it. We might as well learn or at least contemplate how to navigate it when that happens. And the first thing that I want to encourage you with today is that a fail only becomes a failure if you don't learn from it. A fail only becomes a failure when you don't learn from it. Now, there's a difference between failure and failing. I know you're like, TJ, you're crazy. Those are the same words. No. A fail only becomes a failure. It only takes root and develops into a failure when you don't use it, you don't learn from it, you don't allow it to grow you or transform you or change you. I'll give you an example, and this is probably, I guess, one of the saddest examples of failure that led to growth and change. But 1986, the Challenger, NASA, they're launching the spaceship, the Challenger, and there's all of this fanfare, and there's this lady that's on there that, and this is going to be this incredible launch and this historical moment in America. And the Challenger takes off, and all of a sudden, a little ways into flight with everyone watching, everyone excited, it explodes in front of everyone. And it's one of the greatest national fails that NASA ever experienced. So when I started thinking about, I thought about that moment because I obviously I've read about it, I've seen it, clips of it on the Discovery Channel. And when I was thinking about this podcast, it really began to intrigue me. And I thought, I wonder how many explosions that ended in fatality have happened since the Challenger. And so I kind of go back and start, what the deaths when it comes to NASA. And what I realized is that there was a fatal explosion before the Challenger, and then the Challenger exploded. And since the Challenger, there has not been a liftoff from American soil where we have put astronauts in a shuttle to where there's been an explosion that ended in death. And so the first explosion, apparently they didn't learn enough from it. It was a failure. And the second explosion, though it was incredibly sad, I mean, when you think about that moment in American history and for those families, it's a failure that had monumental implications for these families. But they gathered the information and the data, and they have not repeated that failure since. Now, there was some tragic reentry stuff. If you start Googling this, you're like, I'm going to find out if this is true or not. There's some reentry stuff where some people have died. But as far as takeoff goes, everything that I could find, there's been no moment of death. And I'm like, man, they learned. They turned this terrible failure, this fail, into a growing opportunity, and what had become a stain on the program and a failure, they were able to grow from it and launch other people into space, launch exploratory expeditions, and they learned from something that was terrible. So a fail only becomes a failure if you don't learn from it. Listen, if you are crashing and burning in some areas in your life and you keep repeating the same process, listen, pause and look at it and say, okay, what am I supposed to learn from this? What can I glean from this? What can I take from this? What can I personally learn from this moment so that I don't find myself crashing and burning again? You can turn a fail into a win. And that's what, as horrible as that story was from the Challenger with NASA, that's what they did. They turned their fail into a win because it exposed for them. It exposed unknown weaknesses. Sometimes when we fail, when we make a mistake, when we misstep in your spiritual journey with Christ, maybe you sin or you fall into this repeatable pattern of sin. And what it really does is exposes weaknesses in our lives. And if that exposed weakness can be dealt with and confessed and changed, if you're in a business and there's an area where your team just keeps messing up or revenue short or you're not doing great in sales in this one certain area, well, the fails there may be exposing a weakness. If you can diagnose that weakness, then that fail can turn into a win. It exposes unknown weaknesses that we don't realize are holding us back. And then it creates an opportunity for us to evaluate. It creates an opportunity for evaluation, for us to say, okay, clearly something's not right here. Let me climb out 30,000 feet and let me take a bird's eye view of what's going on in my life, what's going on in my business, what's going on in my relationships, and how can I turn this fail into a win. This is going to sound strange, maybe, but one way that a fail can be turned into a win is that it lets you feel defeat. I remember I've shared this. If you've been tracking the podcast for very long, we had one of the very first episodes. I think it might have been the very first episode I had on here was with Tim, the guy that fired me from the church plant that I helped plant. And he's one of my best friends, and we still have a great relationship. If you didn't check that podcast out, go back and listen to it. It's really good on reconciliation. Well, that was a defeat in my life. That was a fail for me in my mind. But I remember the sting of that defeat and failure. And there was other things involved. But in my mind, this was a moment was like, I don't want to feel this again. I don't want to experience the sting of losing relationships and losing a job and losing security in that way. Like I don't really want to experience this defeat again. So I'm going to make sure that I build some things into my life that set me up to win in the future. I'm going to create a work ethic that's full of accountability and transparency, right? Like that's something that came out of that. I'm going to step into an environment where I know I'm surrounded by people that I'm going to give grace to, and they're going to give grace to me. Right? I'm going to step into an environment to where people are going to challenge me and they're going to push me and they're going to tell me the truth. Like that fail, if you want to call it that, in that season of my life has informed so much of the success that I've had in my personal business, in my relationships, and even at our church, the way that I hire, the way that I look at our staff. Through that fail, some of mine and some of Tim's failures, it is completely organized and reorganized the way that I think about our staff, the way I think about our team, and the way that I care about and love people. So fails, in a sense, turn into a win because they expose the weakness, they allow us to evaluate, and they let us feel defeat. And if you really know the feeling of defeat, if you know that feeling, you want to do everything that you can to not repeat those feelings. You don't want to walk into defeat. You want to walk into victory. And if you're a believer, we know that we have the victory in Christ, but we want to live in that victory, and we want other people to experience victory. Like if your team fails, right? Like you don't want them to experience failure. You don't want them to be disheartened. You don't want them to lose passion and lose that zest and that fire for their position, right? If relationships fail, we know what that feels like. If friendships fail, if romantic relationships fail, if marriages fail, you walk through those things. You don't ever want to repeat that process. So allow your failure to inform your decisions. Like, don't get trapped in the fail, making you think that you're a failure. Let it set you up to win. Let it be fuel to really initiate some of the changes that we could probably all make to be better in our lives and in our daily job. The last thing before the last thing, I guess, that's really on my mind when I'm thinking about fail and failure, failing, I will say this because I want to give you three things if you're leading, three things if you're going to are going to lead through failure, if you're going to be over a team or on a team where there's going to be fails, some fails take place. And listen, anytime you're going to be on a team, you're going to have losses. You're going to have days that you win. You're going to have days that you lose. So after this little point, I'm going to give you 3 things that I think, at least for me, have set me up to win when it comes to leading through fails and not allowing them to take hold as failures. The last thing I want to say on the beginning part is that sometimes when we fail, like the win in it is that we tried, we attempted. Like you may, and I'll take it from just a micro level, something very small, but like you may bake a cake, right? And it may be a terrible cake, but like at least you tried to make the cake, right? Like you might want to climb the Himalayas. You might want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro or whatever it is. You may only make it halfway. Well, you made it halfway. You attempted something, even if you fail. And I hope that gives you courage. You may be wanting to start a business. You may want to, you may want to ask that dream girl, that dream guy out, and you're like, well, what if they reject me? Well, it means you tried. Sometimes failure is evidence that you tried something that was bigger than yourself or something you thought you couldn't do. And sometimes you don't fail. Sometimes the failure leads to another opportunity, but sometimes the failure means that you attempted it, that you were brave enough to do something, to step out of your comfort zone and attempt something huge. Every fail doesn't have to turn into a failure if you can learn from it and if it can propel you to something meaningful. Listen, when you're leading through change as a leader, and this is what I really want to give you, I think this is true of it doesn't matter if it's personal relationships, business, organizational, nonprofits, even spiritually here in a church. Scripture says this. There's a proverb, there's a verse in the Word that says, a righteous man falls 7 times but gets back up again. But a wicked man stays down in calamity. And there's a million different translations. I love the one that says, the righteous trip or stumble 7 times, but they get back up. At the slightest breeze, the wicked are cast down. And so it's this idea that a failure, like I believe that you were created by God to do something incredible. And you've heard me say this before on here, like something that only you can bring to the table, your personality, who you are. And so if you stumble, get back up. Like if you stumble, learn from it and grow and get back up again. If you know Jesus, you have the power of Christ living in you. Like you have a team, friends around you, family to speak life into you. Like get back up again over and over and over. I mean, there was a time, and I love this, when Cameron, our son, when he had surgery on his feet, and when they told us, he could walk before his surgery. He was born with bilateral club feet. And after surgery, they said, listen, he may have, he may struggle. We don't really know what his walking is going to look like. And so Cameron he was scooting for a while. He was just kind of scooting around, scurrying around the house on his bottom. And then one day a little friend came over, and his little friend was just running circles, running laps around the island in our kitchen. And all of a sudden, Cameron, and at this point he had leg cast on, and he stands up and begins to like penguin walk across the floor. And he took like 3 or 4 steps. And we were just, oh my gosh, we went crazy. We were celebrating and like videoing it and sending it to family. Well, then he fell down. Well, and I'm going to address this a little bit in this next part, but man, we celebrated him for walking. We gave him grace when he stumbled because every time he stood up, he took a few more steps. And you never know, it may be the 4th fall or the 5th fall or the 10th fall, that when you have the courage to get back up, you finally learn how to walk. And so let that be the encouragement today. You may be in a relationship, or you may be in a business or trying to launch, you may be on your spiritual journey, and you've been trying to follow Jesus, and you've been after him, and you've made a profession of faith, but you feel like you just keep stumbling. Listen, get back up, because one day you're going to be able to walk. Like one day you are not going to crash and burn on that bike. You know what I'm saying? Like there will be a day that you learn to run and you learn to ride, and you will be so glad that you didn't give up when you were trying to walk. And be so glad that you braved those falls and those fails and got back up again. 3 ways really quick I'm going to give you if you're leading, and that was more personal, but this is, if you're a leader, and if you're a boss, if you're a pastor, a teacher, a leader of a household, and you make a failure, I'm only going to give you one thing under this point. When you make a fail, all right, not a failure. When you make a fail, when you fail, when you make a mess, when you stumble, own it. Don't hide it. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't pretend like it didn't happen. A way that you lead out of a fail and away from failure into growth is you own your mistake. You own your failure. You say, hey, listen, I blew it. I messed up. Like, I could have done better. I should have done better. Let me tell you this. I know what some of you may be thinking. I thought this at one time. For the people that I'm leading, I have to look invincible. I have to look strong. I have to look powerful. I have to look like I know it all. Listen, some of the most powerful moments in my leadership have been moments where I made a mistake and said, hey guys, listen, I'm human. Like I don't have all the answers and I just messed up. I'm going to need you to forgive me. Those have been the moment. Now listen, the temptation is to be like, how can I sugarcoat this or blame somebody else, right? Like, what can I do to, not have to own this failure? But there's been times that I've had to look at my team and be like, listen, I totally blew it. Like, I messed up and that was my fault. And owning it gives you credibility and your team will trust you. I love the way Craig Groeschel says it. He says that followers would rather their leaders always be real than always be right. And there's going to be moments that we're wrong. There's going to be moments that we mess up. So leader, listen, if you want to be a good leader, own it. Don't lie. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't gloss over it. Own it so that you and your team can grow for it. So if you're a leader and you make the mistake, own it. If you're a teammate, if you're on a team and the team makes a failure, own it as a team. Own it as a team. You say, well, I'm on the team. I'll give you an example. Just this past Sunday at our church, we had a baptism mishap. All right, and we have this process for baptism, and it usually goes pretty smooth. And there's documents, and people are greeted at the door earlier before service, and kind of walk through what it'll look like. And then there's bags put backstage for people to put their clothes in, and they can change after their baptism. And if you're not a believer and you don't know what I'm talking about, baptism is where after you come to faith in Jesus, you're baptized, immersed, and we go by immersion here at our church. Some denominations would sprinkle, but you go under the water, fully submerged, and then you come out of the water, and it signifies or symbolizes that we believe your life has been buried with Christ, and now you're resurrected to a new life in Christ. We don't believe that water baptism saves you, but that water baptism is an outward expression of what God has done internally, spiritually with you. And so during this baptism process on Sunday morning at our church, some of our team members dropped the ball and messed up. Well, I went backstage as soon as I baptized the two people, and I went backstage and I said, hey, listen, I just want to apologize. I'm sorry. We just missed the boat this morning on some things, and I'm so honored that we and I got to be a part of this, being a part of your baptism at such a special day, but I'm just sorry. I'm sorry some of the things fell through the cracks, and I apologize. And obviously thank God, they were so gracious and kind. They're like, oh, it's no problem. And now, I believe that that's healthy leadership. Now, I didn't make the mistake. I did not put things where they were supposed to be, but it's my team. It's my friends. It's people that I consider family, that we're all on the same team trying to accomplish a goal. So I apologized. And on behalf of the team, and I apologize myself because ultimately I lead. And so I think that's healthy leadership. If you're on a team and your team makes a mistake, you own it together. That's healthy leadership. Toxic leadership, and you need to hear this because I've experienced this before. People that are quick, if you're a leader that when your team fails or a team member fails, you revel in their failure because it didn't happen to you, or you're quick to pass the blame or to say, oh, that was so-and-so. It could have been very easy, for take that. I could have walked backstage and said, hey, listen, I'm sorry, but so-and-so should have emailed on this date, and so-and-so should have put the bags back here, and so-and-so. And listen, I'm so glad that I got to baptize you, and I was here on time, but all these other people dropped the ball, and I'm sorry for them. Like, That would be terrible leadership. But I've experienced that. I know people do that. And that is insane. Don't do that. If you're a leader, don't pass the blame to your team. Own it together. Now, in accountability, and this is kind of the third part, in accountability, like I owned that with them that morning. Hey, listen, I'm sorry. We're sorry. Like, thank you so much for letting us be a part. Now, on the back end, when it came to the team, when you lead through a fail, this goes into parenting. I'm telling you, relationships, business, church, nonprofit organizations. If you're coaching a baseball team, all right, when those that you lead or are responsible, and I'm responsible to lead the team around here. Like at the end of the day, if we mess up, I mess up. And so on the back side of that, on the flip side, I still have to lead through that. There are people who are excellent at their job that made mistakes. So this is what you have to do. You have to balance grace and truth. As a leader, you have to be able to know your team. And this is what it takes. Knowing your team. Like I could have come into our staff meeting, and I'm just being transparent, and our staff, I know they won't mind me being transparent about this, but I could have come into staff meeting on my Monday morning, and I could have put a couple people through the ringer, and in some schools of thought, that would have been, you make an example out of them, and everybody will fear the leadership, and they'll never make those mistakes because they're afraid. Listen, I want people to not make the mistakes around me because they love their job and they love their team, not because they're scared of losing their job. And so for me, when it comes to addressing fails, when it comes to, we call them hits and misses on our staff on Mondays. When I address misses, I know the people in the room that I don't even have to say anything to because they beat themselves up so much over the fail. I know that's never going to happen again. Right? There are people that have to be addressed who will be like, oh man, it's no big deal, whatever, it'll be okay. That person needs to be addressed. They need to be called out. They need to be worked with. They need to be dealt with. But there are people on your team that if you beat them up with their fail, you will lose them because they're already beating themselves up enough. And if you don't know your team and love your team, you'll have no idea who it is that you need to give grace to in abundance and who it is you need to be more stern with the truth is. But there's a balance between the two. And you're not a good leader if you don't know your team well enough to know who you need to give, clear, stern direction to and who you need to administer a little more grace to. When there are fails around you, it is a balancing act to deliver truth and grace. There's I'll give you another. I'm just unpacking our team stuff for you on this episode, but I think it's going to be helpful to you. I had a team member not long ago. We have something called House of Prayer on Tuesday morning. I had a team member who is always like this 15-minute early person who's going to go above and beyond to like take care of everybody and love everybody well and works in other areas to make sure everybody has what they have. And their alarms didn't go off, and so they overslept. And I knew that for me to come in, my responsibility as a leader was to affirm this person, to love this person, to remind this person that, hey, it's going to be okay. Because I knew this person is so excellent and awesome at their job and so self-critical even at times that they're going to beat themselves up enough. I'm going to have to help draw them out of it and set them up to win, right? So you got to know your team. And you've got to love them. Like, I love this team. I don't want them to wallow in their failures. I want them to win. And so if you're a leader, be willing to own your own failures. Be willing to own the team's failure, to learn and grow from it, to share that mistake as a unit and as a team if you really want to grow as a team. And then my third admonition to you would be know your team well enough to know who you have to deliver truth to in a heavy way and who you have to deliver grace to in a heavy way. And you may say, well, TJ, you should have a standard across the board where everybody gets the same amount of truth and the same amount of grace. Listen, that means you don't know people. Like my Cameron, I can look at him in parenting. I can look at him and just kind of furrow my brow a little bit, and he'll be like, oh, Dad, I'm sorry. My Lizzie Claire, I could be Lizzie, stop, and she'll turn around and she'll say, no, Daddy. Like she is, her teacher said she has, gentle defiance. Like she'll just look at you and be like, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. So you have to love differently. You have to parent differently. You have to lead differently. And if you don't know your team, you will not you will never be able to lead them out of failures into wins. And that's the goal. The goal is to win together. So that means we're going to have to grow through our failures. It means we're going to have to own it together. And that means you as a leader, you're going to have to model what it looks like to own your failures, to repent, to be kind, to be gracious, and to work really hard. And that's on you, leader. So don't allow your fails to become your failure, all right? Grow, challenge one another, like use it as an opportunity to expose your weaknesses and work on them, to evaluate where you are and where you're going. And remember, in this area, you may have a few fails stacked up. If you believe in it, if you feel like God's called you to it, if you love it, keep getting back on the bike. Failing sometimes means that you have attempted something that's bigger than yourself for the moment. There was a moment that riding the bike or walking was bigger than our skill set, but we kept at it. And eventually we rode the bike and we walked. I hope you have been encouraged. I hope this has been edifying for you. And listen, if you know somebody that's leading or maybe in a situation where this could be beneficial, like this, share this, subscribe it, send us an email. We would love to hear from you. If there's a topic that you're interested in that you want to hear about that we haven't covered, or anything that you want to say to us, we would love to hear from you on the email or the socials. See ya.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the TJ Malden Leadership Podcast, where we talk about life, leadership, and the gospel. If you enjoyed this episode, share with a friend. For more content, follow us on Instagram and YouTube. If you have any questions you would like to ask TJ, whether it is about life, leadership, or the gospel, you can email those to tjmaldenleadershippodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening, and we hope you join us again on the TJ Malden Leadership Podcast.